Strategic plans are birthed out of vision, but the great number of strategic plans never become reality, and visions never go from a good intention to reality because they die on the operating table of people's lack of faith.
Well, moving from good intentions to a strategic plan that doesn't die on the operating table of lack of faith. My goodness, such great content from Chip Ingram. And it really stops me in my tracks, causes me to do some deep soul searching, as I'm sure it will for you. I'm Ken Powell, host of FCCI's Pathway to Purpose podcast, and we pray that this series will be of tremendous value to you as we launch into this new year. And if you've missed any of the previous segments of the Holy Ambition series, please go back and listen to Chip's admonition about a dislocated heart, a broken spirit, and a radical faith. Well, this message from Chip was recorded about a decade ago at an FCCI International Conference. And if you're listening to this episode in early to mid 2024, then let me encourage you to register today for this year's conference, September 15 through 18, as we've secured some tremendous speakers for this year's conference, including Jordan Rayner, Donald Miller, Richard Blackaby, Crawford Loritz, and more to be announced soon. Learn more and register at conference.fcci.org. I'll include a link in the podcast show notes. Well, Chip takes us straight to traction on this episode as he unpacks the book of Nehemiah and details the practical steps toward an effective, thriving strategic plan.
So we've talked about a dislocated heart. We've talked about having a broken spirit. And we've talked about a radical faith. I think this session is the one that really takes good intentions and moves them to becoming reality. And so on your notes, what you'll notice, I ask a couple questions, and it says, why is it so many people intend to do so much but usually accomplish so little? And my answer is good intentions. I don't think there's any insincere person sitting here going, God really spoke to me, I made a commitment last night, I took a walk, I had a deep talk with my wife, or a business partner and I are here. We have this is what we're going to do. You have good intentions. But there's a place paved with good intentions, as an old expression goes. And I've had a lot of good intentions, and I've looked back at notebooks and conferences I've been to. Or I've read, sometimes I get either take a window to really reflect and read maybe a whole year of journals. Have you ever found out 3 months ago God was speaking to me about this? 6 months ago God was speaking to me about that same thing. A year ago God was speaking to me about that same thing. And it's an amazing thing. I still haven't done anything about it. Now that's only me. But your faces tell me that some of you had that experience. The second question is, why is it that others who carefully prepare to do even a little accomplish so much? And my answer is a strategic plan. A strategic plan. What must happen to our dislocated heart, broken spirits, and radical faith to turn our God-given dreams into reality? And by the way, yes, it's business, but what's your strategic plan for your marriage? What's your strategic plan for your kids or your grown kids? What's your strategic plan for your own spiritual growth? What's your strategic plan for your involvement in your local church? And what is your strategic plan to change the world, one business leader at a time, in your network or sphere of influence? And what I'd like to do is suggest that Nehemiah chapter 2, beginning at verse 5 through, not quite the end of the chapter, will give us amazing insight in how to take your good intentions and my good intentions and turn them into reality. By way of overview, I think there's 4 things we're going to see in this passage. There's 4 progressive phases. Now, I do understand I'm talking to people that a lot in the room that know more about strategic planning than I do. So for many of you, this is review, but I think what you'll see is maybe a biblical perspective of it that might inspire, encourage, and help you turn those good intentions into the plan that you long to see happen. First, it must begin with a vision. And there's lots of books and lots of definitions of vision, so you can add this to the list. My best sense is a God-given burden to see what could be in a person, a place, or a situation if God's power and God's grace were unleashed. To me, that's what vision is all about. What could be. In fact, it moves from a what could be to what has to be in your heart, in a person, a place, or a situation, if God would unleash His power and His grace in this situation. Description of how visions are birthed and how strategic plans, I think, are launched is it has to start not just with a lot of action items and where we're going, but I've put together, and in the notes that you can get off the internet, we've put them in sort of a chart-type form. But in your notes, I think you'll see it as, if you look at the content of chapter 1 of Nehemiah, and then you look at chapter 2, you'll see a parallel of how God almost always births visions out of need. Almost always He births them out of need. And there's lots of needs in the world, and you can't do everything, right? I mean, you can only watch so many, World Visions or Food for the Hungry or teenage girls that are 16 that have a baby or seniors that no one cares about or inner city education issues. There's more issues than you can ever shake a stick at. But I believe God will take a need and He'll bring it to you and you won't be able to shake it. And it keeps coming back. And you read about it, and you dream about it, and you think about it, and there will be a need. And what I want to show you is there was a need that came to Nehemiah's desk. And he couldn't shake it. He responded to it, he stopped, he wept, he mourned, he prayed, he fasted. But it wasn't just a quick, for 3, 4, 5, he couldn't shake it. And then look at the process between chapter 1. Chapter 1, the news, it's a problem, there's a need. Chapter 2, you find a solution. In chapter 1, he's in Susa, he's in his comfort zone. By chapter 2, he's in Jerusalem, he's out of his comfort zone. In chapter 1, how a need starts getting bathed by God's Spirit and giving direction to you there's prayer. It's the process of formation and discernment. Is this the right need? Is this me? Do you want me to do something about it? By chapter 2, there's the answer. There's confirmation within. God speaks to him and says, Nehemiah, I'm calling your play. I'm putting you in the game. Yeah, there's lots of needs and lots of issues, but this one is for you. In chapter 1, the purpose is clearly outlined with results that are identifiable. This is what needs to happen. At the very end of the chapter, we got gates that are down or burned, walls that are down, worship that's not happening. In chapter 2, you move from a purpose to a program. There's a specific means, there's people, there's a timetable. In chapter 1, there's a promise, there's a basis for moving ahead. God, you said this. In chapter 2, there's a provision, confirmation from without. In chapter 1, like all visions, I don't have a verse in the Bible where God starts with a committee somewhere. Okay, I'd like to get 25 of you together in a room, we're going to have a focus group, and I'd like you all to know what I'm really thinking about for the world. Visions are birthed in visionary hearts. Chapter 1, it begins with an individual. Chapter 2, you have a group and a movement started. In chapter 1, it's perceptual. It's an idea. It's a thing. It's a thought. It's something that's got to be done. It's people sitting around and they're drinking coffee and they're talking and they're agonizing and could it be and could it be and could we be the people and we're probably not. Well, maybe we are. And I was praying last night and God gave me a promise. And have you read this? They do research. It starts out perceptual. By chapter 2, it's practical. There's a way to do this. There's a time to do it. There's a team to do it. In chapter 1, God deals always first in your heart. It's a burden from Him you can't shake. Some of you women you understand either from personal experience or from your heart breaking, and you're sick and tired of watching 17-year-old pregnant girls have nothing to do with their baby except abort it. And crisis pregnancy centers all over America got birthed by some women and some men who they saw that. And yes, there's lots of needs in the world, but they couldn't shake that one. And pretty soon what you find is a building going up and a training happening, and pretty soon we're doing ultrasound and a doctor gives up his practice and you just see a movement occur. But it was a burden. In Santa Cruz, I remember one guy watching what was happening in the business world and said, we are just not reaching businessmen on their own terms. And he had a burden and couldn't shake it. And people tried different things. And pretty soon, Wake Up Santa Cruz started. And he would invite key business and tech leaders and sometimes a professional athlete. And he rented a big place like this and he would have a breakfast. And pretty soon 100 and then 200 and 300 guys would show up. And he'd share the gospel and see people come to Christ each time and then get them in Bible studies. But it was a burden. What's the burden on your heart? What is it that you can't shake? Well, what is it that you want to see happen through your business, through your company, something down inside, a need that you can't run away and you've told God, I'm not smart enough, I don't have enough staff, I don't have enough money, I don't have enough people, maybe later, maybe when I retire, or maybe, but in your heart of hearts, whenever you find yourselves getting away and you get real close with the Lord and you listen real quietly, this thing just keeps coming back, and it just keeps coming back. It's how God births visions. And strategic plans need not to be smart people getting in a room and figuring how to get action items done. They always need to start, I believe, from God's perspective, with vision. In the heart and then the head. What I love about Nehemiah is this is not just some spiritual book. This is not just a guy who prays like few people pray. This is a guy whose brain cells really work. This is a guy, before Covey wrote the book Begin with the End in Mind, he began with the end in mind. Right? I mean, when the king says, how long are you going to be gone? He didn't say, well, you know, boy, that is king. Now, the queen's there. That is a good question. I've never built a wall before. In fact, gates and worship and, you know, tell you what, can I get back with you on that? Maybe I'll give you a call. I'll tell you what, I'll send you an email when we get there. I'll kind of let you know how things are going. What do? He set a time. He's a very, very bright guy, positioned with wealth and leadership and strategy. And he had developed a plan to be able to tell someone, this is when I'll be back. Now listen very carefully. Strategic plans are birthed out of vision, but the great number of strategic plans never become reality, and visions never go from a good intention to reality, because they die on the operating table of people's lack of faith. And pretty soon you say, yeah, you know, God wants to do this in our business. Or maybe God wants us to combine and build a shelter for unwed mothers. I had the privilege of being in on one of those in Texas. But then you just start saying stuff to yourself, oh, we don't have the time, we don't have the money, we don't have the staff, we don't have the expertise. And I would say that the second thing you need to remember about strategic plans is where God's agenda is championed, God's resources are channeled. We tend to think when the money comes, when the staff comes, when the people come, when everything's all lined out and I can see how it's going to work, well, then I'll do it. And God almost never works that way. Jesus was emphatic, and his word abounds with this principle that where God's agenda is championed, God's resources are channeled. Watch how it plays out. Picking up in Nehemiah 2, verse 5. And I answered the king, if it pleases the king, and if your servant has found favor in his sight, let him send me to the city of Judah where my fathers are buried, so I can rebuild it. Then the king, with the queen sitting beside him, asked me, how long will you be gone? So I set a time. I also said to him, if it pleases the king, may I have letters to the governors of the Trans-Euphrates, so they will provide me with safe conduct until I arrive in Judah. And may I have a letter to Asaph, keeper of the king's forest, so he will give me timber to make beams for the gates of the citadel by the temple, for the city wall, and for the residence that I'll occupy. And because the gracious hand of my God was upon me, the king granted my requests. So I went to the governor of the Trans-Euphrates, I gave them the king's letters, and the king also, this is abounding grace, he didn't ask for this. The king also sent army officers and a cavalry with me, just to make sure things go well. Would you circle a couple key phrases for me as we do a little Bible study? That phrase up there, second line, let him send me. Let him send me. You know what that's called? A radical step of faith. He's living in the lap of luxury, and he's saying, I want to go where it's really bad, where it's really hard, where God's agenda is faltering. I'm stepping up. Will you then circle that little phrase, I can rebuild it? So I can rebuild. That's his vision, isn't it? He has a preferable picture, what could happen and what must happen if God's power and God's resources would take these walls and these gates burned with fire and these people would say, what could happen? That I can rebuild it. That's his vision. Then we use circle, so I set a time. So I set a time. That's his strategic plan. Now, you'll learn how he develops it, but he is able at this point to say, I'm going to be gone this long. And his vision is, when I come back, it'll be rebuilt. So he's had to figure out how to get from point A to point B somehow. Then notice the final phrase, would you circle the little phrase, give me timber. And you just might write in the margin, resources provided. God will put a burden and a vision, and it'll start in your heart, then it'll move to your head. It'll go from on your heart to probably a small group of people's hearts. It'll go from a perception or a concept into practicality. It'll go from a problem to a solution. It'll go to God moving in you and giving you promises very specifically, this is what you do, and then he'll start answering prayers. And then the temptation will be, when I see it all lined out, and when I see exactly how it works, then I'll do it. And God says that, no. I want you to come up with the plan before I give you the resources. In fact, what he often will do is affirm that you're on the right track by you coming up with the plan and saying, I'm taking the step. And he goes, good, now I know you're really serious about it. You've thought it through. Now I'll resource it. And here's a little phrase I like. The key is ask the king. He has unlimited resources. Great movements are not lacking because of lack of resources, but because of lack of vision and radical faith and clear-cut strategic plans to accomplish them. God has unlimited resources. The problem isn't there's not enough money or staff or time or people or research or intelligence. The problem is God can't find a man or a woman to stand in the gap. God can't find someone who says, I am willing, I'll step up. There's the problem, I see the solution. Here's the promise. There's the answer. It's a burden of my heart. Now it's a plan in my head. Lord, if you would bring the money, the time, the staff, the insight, and the wisdom, I'll do it. When God finds that man or that woman who gets to the point where they begin to write out what it would look like, then he knows something's happening. So when you get to that point, rather than saying, well, I'm going to wait, ask the king. But you don't have to ask the king of Persia. You can ask the king of the universe. I mean, he literally got the king of Persia's gold card. He says, I would like your signature. And so he just goes to the forest. He goes, we're doing a major work project. Oh, yeah? How are you going to pay for it? See that? Artaxerxes, MasterCard. You know, our relationship is priceless. But for all the timber that I need, there's Artaxerxes, World MasterCard. Here's how much I need. See all those guys behind me? Yeah. They're the king's cavalry and officers. And you know what? I'm on a mission from God. And I don't even have sunglasses on. And I can't sing. And I'm not a blues brother. I'm a God warrior. And I'm on a mission from God. And as he asked the king, God affirmed and confirmed. Now, let's remember, when he asked the king his radical step of faith, he put his life on the line. If the king says no, he's not worried about timber. He's worried about breathing. And so when you take that radical step of faith, sometimes it gets pretty scary. But notice, God resources the movement. God's provision is often the way he affirms and confirms. Here's the point. Where God's agenda is championed, God's resources are channeled. Don't not do what God is leading you to do because you think, I don't have the money, I don't have the staff, I don't have the time. If God can find a man or a woman who will step out, create the plan, and begin to move forward and let God show you how fast and how much he's going to do. Your business is his business. Your family is his family. Your dream, it's the burden he put on your heart. Now, some of you may say, I know there's people here that went to Harvard Business School, and I'm sure they're very good at writing strategic plans, but mine is a little bit smaller business, and I was too busy to get my MBA at Harvard, and so maybe writing a strategic plan is not my strength. Well, I'm a fellow non-Harvard MBA with you, and so I had to learn it from Nehemiah. But I will tell you real quickly, what you're going to find is the next two things. Your strategic plan must be birthed in private. He'll show you exactly how to do it. And then it needs to be launched in public. Let me just go through this briefly and show you how to birth. This is a process. This is how you birth a strategic plan. Beginning in verse 17, I went to Jerusalem, and after staying there for 3 days, I set out during the night with a few men. I had not told anyone what God had put in my heart to do for Jerusalem. There were no mounts with me except the one I was riding on. By night I went out through the valley gate, through the jackal well and the dung gate, examining the walls of Jerusalem which had been broken down and its gates which had been destroyed by fire. Then I moved on toward the fountain gate and the king's pool, but there wasn't enough room for my mount to get through, so I went up through the valley by night, examining the wall. Finally I turned back and returned through the valley gate. The officials did not know where I had gone or what I was doing, because as yet I had said nothing to the Jews or the priests or the nobles or the officials or any others who would be doing the work. This is a very packed little passage, but let me give you 3 keys to birthing your strategic plan. First is silence, and why is to listen. You come to something like this, God starts lining it up in your heart, the dots start to connect, this burden starts happening, He gives you a couple promises, and you just want to run and blab to everyone, I'm going to do this, we're going to build a center for crisis teens, we're going to start a business operation that's going to bring people to, and you want to go blah, 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 blah. Don't do that. Don't do that. Don't do that. Notice verse 11. It says after 3 days. Now this guy would have equivalent to the kind of leverage of a vice president visiting a small town. Can you imagine the vice president of the United States visiting a small town in America and for 3 days just kind of holing up in his hotel? Why is he here? Are there meetings? Who's he supposed to meet with? Has the mayor seen him? What's going on? For 3 days, he lays low. What they don't know that at night, what's he doing? Did you notice how many times the word at night? The phrase, I said nothing to no one. I told no one, verse 12. Once you sense God has given you a vision to respond to a need that is clearly His will, don't go blab about it. Go listen. Don't assume you have all the answers. Don't assume you have all the facts. Discover what others think, their views, their lives, their analysis. Look at the need carefully. That phrase I put in bold, examining the walls, is a medical term of a surgeon looking at wounds and pulling back the wounds to find out what's the significance of the wound. We jump so quickly, especially as entrepreneurs, from need to solution. And you find it out for sure. You don't guess and you don't anecdotally throw it around the room and then start spending tons of money and tons of time to hit a target that may not be the right target. He went and he listened. Second thing is there's secrecy, and that's to assess. He did his homework. Evaluate not only the extent of the need, but what are the available resources, the attitudes, the climate, the issues. Who's for you? Who's against you? I mean, I have this picture of Nehemiah for 3 days, maybe stopping by a couple coffee shops, finding out where's the power in the room, who's against the Jews, who's open, who's respectful, who are the leaders, where's the formal power, where's the informal power, who are the people that are going to get on board early, who are going to be the later adopters. How much resources do we have here? He probably learned about Tobiah, and there's some bad guys out here that are against everything. In our plan, we better figure out this plan to deal with not only the possibilities of good that can happen, but let's think through some of the issues that might happen and could go south, and let's have a plan so that if they do, we're ready for it. Secrecy is to assess. Notice he set out by night, verses 12, 13, and 15. Officials didn't know, verse 16, he said nothing. This is so hard for us when we get excited, isn't it? We just want to. We think the more we talk about it, the more we bring it into reality, and the opposite is true. Third is solitude to strategize. to strategize. You listen and find out, okay, now I know what the real issues are. You do clear assessment, clear research. Who's with you? Who's against you? What are the pros? What are the cons? Who's done this before? What are the best practices? I mean, in our day, I don't think he did it then, but what we did is we went around and said, who are making disciples better than anyone else, and what should we learn from them before we come up with any kind of new plan? We went around the world. I went to all of our major cities all around the world to find out where is God working and how is he working and what models, what is God already doing? We rather than starting with a blank sheet of paper, we kind of went with the old Henry Blackaby. What is God doing that's so unmistakable? And maybe instead of coming up with some great idea, we ought to cooperate with what he's doing. Wow, look what's happening in Johannesburg. Look what's happening in Southeast Asia. Look at what's happening in Nigeria and Lagos. And gosh, we didn't plan that, we didn't plan that, we didn't plan that. And gosh, it's going through pastors and whole denominations are being trained and they're paying for that. And we only put the radio on for 2 days a week and 1,000 people showed up and we trained them and each of them trained. And my lands, we had 250,000 people that reached and it cost us 3 radio programs and 1 visit. Gosh, this may be more cost effective than how we were doing it before. And the Nigerians thought it up all by themselves. Oh my lands, what's happening here? You figure out what God is doing, and then you begin to align yourself with it. And in solitude, you develop the team with specific strategic plans and God-given solutions. You develop a means and a time to communicate the plan. That's when you sit around with the whiteboard in the back room late at night and say, okay, we've done our analysis. We haven't told anybody. Now, when do we launch this? Who do we bring in early? Where's the money going to come from? What tools do we need? What expertise does we need? How are we going to implement this thing? And by the way, I would say that this happens not only in your business and in your ministry, but I would say some of us need to launch some strategic plans in very delicate areas like our marriage, our spiritual growth, and our family. Notice we pick it up. Your strategic plan must be launched in public. Then he said to them, you see the bad situation that we are in? That Jerusalem is desolate and its gates are burned with fire? Come, let us rebuild the wall of Jerusalem, that we may no longer be a reproach. And I told them how the hand of my God had been favorable to me, and also about the king's words which he had spoken to me. Then they said, let us arise and build. So they put their hand to the good work. 7 steps to launching a strategic plan. And these are very simple. Number 1, clearly define the problem. People get used to living with conditions that are deplorable. I said to them, do you see the situation we're in? I'm going to tell you, most people don't see. So you clearly define the problem. Second, identify with the problem. Notice the next word, the situation we're in. He didn't say your problem, your issues, what messed up. How come God gave you all these promises and the walls are down and you're not even worshiping? Why don't you guys get with it? I don't hear that. If you want to launch it, clearly define the problem, identify with the problem. It's not their problem, it's our problem. Third, propose a we solution. Notice he says, you see the bad situation we are in, that Jerusalem is desolate and its gates burned with fire. Then notice the solution. Let us rebuild. Not you. Let us rebuild. 4, give a clear, strong challenge. I think this is sometimes where, we're so afraid. Ask big things of big people. And they're busy, and they're already doing something else. Just don't even worry about that. It's their responsibility to figure out what their priorities are, not yours. If you have a great vision, you will need great people with great commitment, with great resources, with great capacity, and you say, you want to change the world or not? If you want to keep doing that, you can keep doing that. If God's called to you, this is what we're going to do. And he challenged them. And he asked, let's rebuild the wall. I mean, can you imagine how overwhelming that was? They just got used to it. They go to work, you'd say, okay, Gladys, yeah, did you bring the donkey again? Yeah, well, you can't get through here. There's all these boulders and rubble. Oh, I forgot, Fred. Okay, we'll see you later. And he gets over it, and they just get used to it. People get used to living in deplorable, ungodly situations, and someone needs to say, do you see what's going on here? We can make a difference. But then you don't say, well, maybe we could move that one boulder so it'd be a little easier for your donkey to get out. He said, let's rebuild the walls. Let's really change things. And then notice, motivate at the deepest level. Intrinsic, no soft sell. It'll only take a few days, guys. Could I get you just for a few hours each day, and maybe some of you and some other people, and maybe the king will say, it's only a Sunday school class. It's just about 45 minutes on Saturday night, and it won't require much. That's not how you get good people. We get a 6th grade class. I've been praying for a month. I think you're the best. It'll cost a lot. You're in 2 other ministries in the church. You'll need to drop out of at least one. We only have about 30 kids in the class right now, but we did some research. There's 700 6th graders in our community. And we found in the research that 6th grade is one of the most pivotal times of all spiritual things that happen in a kid's life. We want you to dream a dream, form a team, and say, how are we going to reach the 700 6th graders in our community? Now, don't tell me right now. I want you to pray about it for 30 days. Talk about it with your wife. And I'll buy you breakfast 30 days from now. It won't be easy. It'll be very difficult. It'll take everything you have. And you can change the course of possibly our whole town. That's how you motivate people. Did you notice how he motivated them? You're a disgrace. It's intrinsic. You want to keep living like this? You want to keep dishonoring God? He motivates them from within. No promise of ease or reward. It's got to come from the inside. And then help others see God's hand in your vision. He says, look at the timber. Look at the letter. Look at the king. God's in this. I mean, for me, I can say to people now, some guy I didn't meet paid for this, and then these guys I didn't know, they showed up, and they did that. And then God raises up a David Pock over here, and another guy in Lagos over here, and someone in Johannesburg over here. And then, some guy who's got this great thing going and works for Disney, is doing this big marketing thing, is introduced to someone. And I say, how would you like a wonderful thing to leave all that and leave your family and come work with me for a lot less money? And then I went to the guy in Johannesburg, and he had developed this. They had more employees in South Africa than we had in the home office. And he built it from scratch. And I said, you know what? This is what we want to do around the world. This is a great job, Martin. How would you like to leave your home, your country, your family, and move to Atlanta and do this all around the world globally? You want to do that? And he did. And then another guy was like, hey, you know something, God, I think ministries like In Touch, they're huge. It's $85 million. You've had all this good training. You're a lawyer by training. You've done, tell you what, now that you've been trained by them, this is what needs to happen in the development side. How would you like to leave that really big organization and really do something exciting in terms of carving your own path? And so he did. And God brings the greatest resources. He brings the right people. And he brings the right team, and then he brings the money, and then he opens doors, and you realize, you tell people, this is what God has done. You can't make that happen. Let them know. I love blocking these words. This is what God's doing. Would you like to join us as we're joining him? And that's exactly what Nehemiah does here. And finally, explain specifically how everyone can participate in the project. Notice that resounding, let us arise and build. There's 2 questions on the bottom there. One, do you have a strategic plan for your spiritual growth, marriage, neighborhood, friends, ministry, and work? And the second one is, what would God have you specifically to do to move from your good intentions that he's shown you here to turning it into a strategic plan? And the last question I would like is, if you could, to go ahead and write down, who will help you with that? I find that it's hard, isn't it? I mean, writing plans out, getting it, it's so hard. Who could coach? Who could help? Who could you bounce it off of? Who could say, hey, are you following that? Can I take a look at it? Could we meet every 10 days or once a week and just pray through this thing? And I will tell you, as you do that, God's resources, time, energy, wisdom, grace, changing people's hearts, whatever needs to happen, he's looking for a man or a woman to stand in the gap before him for the land. His eyes are really going to and fro, not just throughout the whole earth, but this room. And what if he brought you here to dislocate your heart and to cultivate a broken spirit? And what if he just, this nudge, this thing you can't shake, this burden, what if he really wants you to take a radical step of faith And what if the next step towards showing God that you're really serious about it is you would sit down and block off some time and write the rough draft of a strategic plan that would help change the world.
If this podcast episode resonates with you, then consider linking arms with the hundreds of Christian business owners and leaders here at FCCI as we want to support your calling to transform the world through Christ. Learn more about FCCI events, business leadership groups, training resources, and much more at fcci.org. Thanks for listening, and may God empower your journey as you lead a company for Christ.